Welcome back, YouTube. It's your host, Rich GNT, and we're here to talk about what's going on in Canada. Their Prime Minister is really pushing for the Canadians to buy Canadian. They said, no, we're not going to be subservient. We're not going to be reliant on America or any other country for that matter. So we need you to buy Canadian. And honestly, I'm not against it. I think most countries should be doing that. I think most countries should be boasted by their own economy when it comes to producing and selling their own products. I see nothing wrong with that. To me, it's just kind of odd because it's one of those situations where it's like, you're telling me that the only reason you're making these changes to support and bolster your own economy through your own production is because you kind of got slapped on the ass and said, no, we're going to make sure they get reciprocal tariffs. It makes you think, and I could be wrong, let me know, that maybe someone was benefiting a lot more from this deal than others. My personal opinion, just what I think. But let's not waste any time. Let's jump right in.
The federal government will announce on Thursday the next set of major infrastructure projects that will get fast-track approval. The first list came out in September. The selected projects will be subject to the Prime Minister's new Buy Canadian policy. Mark Carney was in New Brunswick today to highlight the plan. He says it will help boost Canada's economy and insulate it from Donald Trump's tariffs.
Being our own best customer will put more of every public dollar back into our economy, creating good Canadian jobs, Canadian careers, using Canadian resources and benefiting Canadian communities.
The CBC's Marina von Stackelberg joins me now live from Ottawa. So Marina, how is the Buy Canadian policy going to work?
Well, this will be a federal policy to use more Canadian products, technology, and labor. And the budget last week outlined exactly how that will be done in terms of it no longer being a best effort to do this, but a clear obligation. What we don't have, though, and we didn't receive today from the Prime Minister, is any specific details on what these regulations will look like. What we do know is that this policy will apply to all federal agencies and Crown corporations, federal procurement and federal infrastructure funding, Build Canada Homes, the housing program, the defense industrial strategy. What is still unclear is whether it will apply to private companies that are building infrastructure. If they want to get the federal government to fast track their project or provide money for that project, will they have to buy Canadian? Now, the policy is also saying that if a domestic option is not available, that foreign suppliers would still need to use Canadian content or rely on trusted partners. Now, Prime Minister Carney was asked today, how do you make sure that this Buy Canadian policy doesn't violate Canada's international trade agreements? Have a listen.
That's a really good question, because unless you're going to make it so that there's some type of penalty or some type of really good incentive, whether it's some, like if you buy Canadian, you get like a little bit of discount, something like that. How can you enforce that? Because let's just say another country is offering something better, federally, and then just like what she said, those private companies, and they look a little bit more appetizing. What's going to stop them? What are you going to do? It's kind of weird. But like I was saying earlier, isn't it interesting that this is what it took? The US and Canada kind of like biting each other back and forth for them to go, you know what, we're just going to do our own shit. We don't need you. It's like, so did you have the capabilities to do it before? You just didn't want to? And then, okay, if that was the case, why didn't you want to? Because wouldn't it make more sense to do it for yourself? So that leads me to believe that if you did it within the borders of Canada, that if it was only Canadian, it would probably be more expensive because you know what I'm saying? Like, are you following me? If it was cheaper to do it with Canadian goods and services and products, why weren't you doing that from the jump? So it probably was cheaper to do it American-wise, you know what I'm saying? Or you didn't have the capabilities to, because when it comes to infrastructure and when it comes to, I guess, the services that America and probably other countries had, you just didn't have it, which kind of showed that you're not really as developed and you're not really doing what you're supposed to do when it comes to helping your people and your government. But I could be off.
We've done a review of all our free trade obligations to ensure that they are designed consistent with that. And we will, related to that, if I may, Jacques, we'll be making adjustments to the way the Canadian International Trade Tribunal operates, which is something that's internal to Canada. So many of the constraints are actually self-imposed on ourselves.
Now, this policy is also stipulating that ministerial approval will be required if there is a decision to buy from abroad. And that raises the question, will that potentially create backlogs if a project is waiting for a minister's signature before it can get the go-ahead?
So, Marina, is there anything that could hold this Buy Canadian policy back and make it difficult to implement?
Yeah, so there is questions about how this will actually be implemented and sort of what sort of regulations the federal government will be putting on these policies. And obviously this is a good politics idea in the sense that Canada is facing a threat to our sovereignty and our economy from the United States. But we're also dealing...
I'm sorry, and if you're Canadian, I'm sorry if I may come off a certain way, but don't really care. Isn't it crazy that the U.S. is saying, hey, look, we just want things to be a little bit more reciprocal. And if you don't follow that, we're just going to keep raising it higher and higher. That your economy, that your survivability as a country was hinged so much on us that the minute we start making moves and changes, that, not saying you guys are on the brink of collapse, that's not what I'm saying, but it seems like you guys are just going to fall apart unless things are, like, changes are made. I'm hearing that, and it doesn't sound insane to you. It's kind of like what happened during COVID, right? When like the countries essentially kind of quartered themselves off from each other, and we realized as a country, I don't know what happened in Canada, but I know in the U.S. we realized a lot of our medical supplies that we got were from other countries, namely China, and we realized, oh shit, we're kind of fucked. I don't know. I don't know if other countries looked at that. I don't know if like the governments in other countries looked at that and thought that was kind of scary and thought, okay, we gotta make some changes. It can't be, and maybe it is. It cannot be that us making changes threatens you guys' sovereignty, as she stated, so much. Like, how much were you relying on us then? That's the real question. And why? Was it just cheaper? Was it better? If someone can explain that to me, please, because I understand it. I'm seeing it. You know, I don't blame them for wanting to just do Canadian shit. That's your country. You do what you want to do. But it baffles me a little bit.
With inflation and the high cost to construct things in this country. And the question is, too, do we have full capacity to buy Canadian for everything that we want to build here in Canada? Ontario Premier Doug Ford has pointed out the fact, for example, that construction steel is not widely made here in this country. There's also the risk, if these regulations go too far, would it potentially force these different projects to use a domestic supplier and then drive up the cost or add to delays? Now, Carney was asked about that. He did not address that question specifically, but he did say that the money is there, that the approvals will be there, that there will be opportunities for companies, he says, as well as for large-scale demand for skilled labor. So setting the stage, essentially saying that there will be support there and there will be measures there in place.
Yeah, she actually brings up a really good point, because just like what they said a little bit earlier, what happens to the backlog? What if because they're trying to mainly only do Canada, right? When it comes to approving certain projects and everything that needs to get done, unless you're going to have the manpower to support that, which maybe they do, I'm not too sure, is going to have a really big issue when it comes to getting things approved in a timely manner. You know what I'm saying? And it's going to cause a lot of frustration. And just like what she said too, it might drive up the prices of what you guys are trying to do over there in Canada. Because look, seemingly based off of what she's saying and what I can infer, it wasn't cheap to build things over there. And another issue that I'm kind of thinking of, and I could be off, what if, let's just say you guys are steel, right? What if the steel that you guys produce, kind of like how it is in China, is cheap, not as good? What do you guys do in that situation? Now you're building things that are using subpar materials because you're trying to go with the only Canada buy Canadian. You know what I'm saying? So that kind of creates a whole slew of other issues. And I have questions as well. Yeah, but seemingly he didn't answer that question. Right? We know why.
And how is the Canadian steel industry reacting today?
Yeah, so a colleague of mine here in Ottawa spoke with the Steel Producers Association, and they are very supportive of this. They say it won't solve the crisis, but it will help. It will provide stability, they say, for both the companies and workers. And pointing out the fact that the Canadian steel industry right now has the capability in their eyes to make about 80% of what the industry here in Canada wants. But the steel industry says it is a myth that this would make steel here more expensive. Have a listen to their response.
For decades, the Canadian steel industry has been able to compete in the marketplace, and we have certainly done so in the United States. We are their largest supplier of steel, and if we can compete in the U.S., we certainly can compete here.
It doesn't make any sense. So why weren't you doing it? All right, that's the only question I have. If that was the case and you're able to compete here in America, which that could come from a basis of not so much quality, but quantity, price, you know what I'm saying, could have been cheaper as opposed to when we try to do over here. Why was it not done before? Because if you can compete, you know, and one thing we know about competing and then capitalism in a sense is that the better one wins more often than not. So what was the issue? That's what I'm confused about. And you said for decades, so what's the problem? You know, and at the end of the day, look, time will tell. Time will tell whether this is all just, you know, talk or if this is actually like shit that you could put into effect and be like, yeah, no, we got it. We don't need anybody else. Which I support. I support countries being able to stand on their own and do whatever they need to do, especially when it comes to supporting their people and making sure that their people are doing okay.
Industry does say, Catherine Cobden there, that they really want to actually see, though, again, what these regulations truly are. They have been told that they will be released sometime this month. And they said that the federal government doing this Buy Canadian policy is a good step, but they're really curious to see if provinces, territories, and municipalities will also sign on to this. And also pointing out that this needs to be at a large scale. Even just one infrastructure project, even if it's a big one, the industry says that that may only be enough to keep the steel industry going for a couple of weeks just with one single project.
Marina, thank you. The CBC's.
That's interesting. And yet again, something I gotta look into, because how you guys are orientated when it comes to your provinces and then territories and everything like that seemingly is a lot more complicated than I thought. So we'll definitely be trying to do my research and reading up on that, because I can't be up here just talking nonsense and not know what I'm talking about. But yeah, no, I'm for it. Buy Canadian. Yeah. I see nothing wrong with that. You get to bolster your economy. You give people work within your, you know, your country and everything like that. You could stimulate growth when it comes to jobs. Stimulate people deciding to create their own businesses. You know, in my very, very, very little, in comparison to how much knowledge is out there, information about economics and everything like that, I see nothing wrong with this. It becomes an issue when you start to put heavy regulations on companies and on the federal government itself, and you kind of bind people's hands a little bit. And just like what I said before, you create this backlog of work that needs to be done, but it can't be, because we have all these things that need to get sorted through because they may not have the capabilities. Not saying it's the case, but it could be a problem. And then two, it becomes an issue when it comes to quality. If the quality of work that is being produced by, you know, Canadian, you know, workers or whatever, or companies, is not up to par, you're kind of just shooting yourself in the foot. Because the last thing you want to do is create and have infrastructure that is poorly done. But yeah, like I said before, I see no issue with this. Americans should buy American, Canadians should buy Canadian, Chinese should buy Chinese. See nothing wrong with that. You help your economy, you help your people. Cool. Well, you guys already know the drill. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, comment down below, tell me your thoughts. How do you feel about this whole plan? Like I said, I have no issue with this plan. This sounds like a great plan. I can't say it enough. If you're going to find a way to do for your people and have it within, I guess, your borders, go forth and do it. Sounds fantastic to me. But yeah, let me know your opinions in the comments down below. Or if you feel like this is going to be like terrible and you're Canadian, you understand why it's going to be terrible, please let me know. I'm interested in hearing that, because I'm flying blind a little bit. That's it for now, you guys. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.